So Corey Harlan here, Elisa Chang and Elisa Heim are both absent. Dale Van Valkenburg.
I'm here, but not sitting in the normal chair.
All right, mixing it up. Okay, John Fisher,
Here.
Jeff Baker,
Here.
Kathy Austin. Here. Tina Chadwick,
Keenan's not on.
Kurt Alexander.
Here.
Great. Counselor Perkins.
Counselor Perkins.
I'm here online.
Great. Hello. Katie Brooks or Sarah Odendahl.
I don't see Katie or Sarah.
All right, we've got Sharon Smith finally in person. Hello. Rachel Polton.
Rachel's not online.
Hey, Nick Wheeler.
No.
Lynn Middleton
Nope.
and Rachel Zachem.
Nope.
Okay, lean and mean today.
It's a great fever.
Yeah, I do. It's 80 degrees.
Yes, but nice outside.
So,
Yeah.
just a question. I mean, I doubt Nick is ever gonna come. Is there somebody else from the county who can come in his stead? That would
I had asked him that previously. I can follow up on that question again. He had kind of intended to redesignate somebody, but I just don't think that it's kind of top of his radar. So I can send another reminder and let him know, they are able to send any staff at any point. There doesn't necessarily need to be a designated person that has to be like approved by council. That agency can send whoever they'd like. So I can re-ping him.
Yeah,
We also have
it's up
never.
to them, but
Yeah, we actually have a spot for somebody from COCC as well that they've never responded to our outreach to include somebody.
Just means I can't object to any
Yeah.
applications on the tax.
Sure.
You wait.
So. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to conflicts of interest disclosures. We'll go ahead and start over here with you, Sharon, and we'll just go around.
Work for the school district, no conflicts, more potential conflicts.
I don't know if there's anything on the agenda that would be a potential conflict, but my employer owns property at 181 Franklin and at 100 Hawthorne.
Thank you. No conflicts of interest here.
Kathy, also no conflicts here.
Kathy, you might want to move the mic just a little bit closer.
Oh, sorry. Kathy Austin, no conflicts here.
John Fisher, potential conflicts. My employer is doing engineering consulting on some BCD projects.
Can you just name your employer too? for the
Ashley
record?
Advanced Engineering.
Thanks.
Jeff Baker with Craft 3, no conflicts. I'm Kurt Alexander, conflict at 934 Northeast First Street, 821 Northeast Second Street, 205 Northeast Hawthorne Avenue. I'm doing the development on 821 Northeast Second Street.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Move on to approval of the minutes, and we're approving minutes for our last two tab sessions because we did not have them for the last time we met. So need a motion to approve the minutes. Or if there are any edits or, suggested adjustments.
I have one for the second set of, but did you want to do approve the first one individually and then the second one?
Yeah, if you have an edit, we can do approve the March minutes and then.
Motion to approve the March minutes.
I'll move.
I'll second.
That was
First
Kathy.
and Jeff second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Unanimous approval of the March minutes. And now we'll move to the April minutes. Kathy has a suggested edit.
Just a suggestion on item 3. I apologize, I was late. I had a conflict and I was just wondering, would it be worth mentioning that I had suggested to the Parks Department that they consider a builder being able to develop a pocket park as in lieu of paying their fees, provided it was designed to their specifications. I just feel like I'd like to memorialize that somewhere so it keeps in the discussion. Because I know a lot of, there's frustration on developers if they're wanting to put a nice park area in there, but then they still have to pay the park fees. So that might be an option. So just wanted to put that in.
Okay. Any comments on what Kathy suggested? All right, then we would look for a motion to approve the April minutes with that edit.
Second.
I'll motion to approve the April minutes with Kathy's insert.
All right, John, with the motion and Kurt with the second. Approval of the April minutes, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And all opposed? All right, unanimous approval of the April minutes. All right, folks, now we'll move on to the good stuff. We are gonna dive, I think, spend most of our time today, 45 minutes, what we've allocated, but we'll see where we get, to talk more about our work plan updates. Ally's got, I think, some new information for us to consider, and then there'll be a possible action that we can take at the end of that discussion about how to further advance the work plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I think we had a really great discussion kind of at the last meeting of brainstorming different ways and kind of talking about a lot of different initiatives that the city is going to be undertaking. And I think kind of one of the final requests was for staff to kind of evaluate what opportunities are there to do more of like a framework plan for the core area. And so I've been meeting internally with leadership and other city departments, and kind of there's kind of some more bad news than good news, but I think that you all spurred some really important questions, and we are starting to kind of have more internal discussions with multiple departments as they scope some of those big projects to make sure that we're keeping the core area vision in mind. But I'll kind of like frame where some of those conversations went and just kind of categorize it as it wasn't all like, yeah, we'll give you everything you want. So just kind of wanted to remind folks that CAB's role is primarily to be an advisory board to the Bend Urban Renewal Agency, while we gave CAB the ability to make recommendations directly to city council, because we recognized there's a lot of value in being able to make recommendations to both of those boards or those governing bodies, that most of the funding and the resources and your staffing resources actually come from that borough allocated funds. And so just kind of want to remind folks that most of the work plan for CAB should still focus on more of those borough related activities, not to say that they can't also include, policy direction for city council as well. We get that it's all together, it's all one, but just kind of wanted to remind you all of kind of your primary role as an advisory board is really to borough, but that you also have that ability to make recommendations to city council, but we would want city council to want your input on those things versus it just kind of coming ad hoc all the time. So we want to make sure that your work plan receives that support and direction from city council before we spend a lot of time and resources of city staff resources on not that we don't keep the core area in mind, but just kind of framing that of, that's kind of the primary role of CAB.
Know our place.
Yes. Trying to be
Know our
diplomatic
place.
here. John, did you have
Now
sort of an
there's a
immediate
Just-
question
I
on that?
understand that between, my understanding is that Borough and CAB were the same body.
In the city.
Borough and the
Borough
city.
City council are the
So
same
they're-
group and different roles. I'm trying to.
They're
understand.
technically two separate agencies. So the way that they have, different funding sources, and in some cities, the Urban Renewal Agency is actually a separate body. So it has different membership than their city council. We've decided in Bend that the city council membership should be the same membership as the Urban Renewal Agency, but they are technically two distinct agencies.
I thought it was total coincidence that there was.
Yeah.
Right.
Total coincidence. So Borough actually has a separate chair than our mayor. So Borough's chair is Councilor Campbell, or Borough member Campbell, whereas our city council mayor is Councilor Keebler and Mayor Keebler.
And so it comes out of funding source and then just the scope of that body.
Yeah, so the Urban Renewal Agency really, their focus is the 3 urban renewal districts. So Juniper Ridge, Murphy Crossing, and Core Area Urban Renewal District. And we understand that there's a lot of overlap because the people overlap significantly, but
Right.
technically they are separate agencies and entities.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. Like looking at Matt to see if he had anything to add. So with that being said, I think that there's still a lot of the proposed work plan that we shared with you that, city staff is still in support of, that we think would have probably council buy-in, but I just wanted to kind of frame that discussion a little bit more. So again, these are kind of ongoing efforts that we see falling within the scope of the core area advisory board that we discussed with you at your last meeting. We did kind of modify some of the language around what we think would be appropriate areas that are kind of more city council led projects where CAB could potentially get involved. So the climate friendly area study and designation process, and I'll provide kind of an update on that. Transportation project updates, just kind of receiving the updates of what's going on transportation wise in the core area, particularly with projects that you're allocating or recommending to allocate resources to with core area funds. And then the stormwater master plan, we see probably an opportunity for you all to play a role, especially as it relates to infill and density policies that might get established through that effort. And that group, our utilities group and our infrastructure engineering and planning department, I just met with them yesterday and they're kind of planning to do like a sub-study specific to the core area as part of that stormwater master plan. So I met with them yesterday to kind of talk about what that scope does or doesn't include and where we could try to incorporate some of the discussion that we had at your last meeting and make sure that that gets fed into their process too. And then obviously park goals, that's, it's a separate agency that oversees parks, but as they mentioned at their last presentation, I think that they're open to receiving, a CAB members' input, and they'll have to determine what that public process looks like for their organization. But that'd be an area where you could make recommendations to city council on how they collaborate with the park district. And then we did kind of last meeting, we talked about kind of this BCD code audit where we're really looking at what are barriers to adaptive reuse projects, and then kind of evaluating some of the street standards. We looked into kind of how could we broaden the scope of that street standard update, and could we do a little bit more of like a mobility framework planning, and then kind of also met with some of the departments that are overseeing other projects that would have an impact on the core area, and just kind of we don't have the budget or the resources from the core area funds to really support a master planning effort in this biennium. That's just kind of what it is. And every dollar that we would allocate to that would come out directly from some of those assistance programs that you just supported. So you'd really be making that trade-off between providing another dollar to a business to do some of those physical improvements in the district to doing more of this planning work. So just want to kind of recognize that really is a direct trade-off. And then related, I know City Hall came up a lot at the last meeting. So just kind of wanted to address that directly. So our current biennial budget that City Council will be reviewing over the next 2 months does include funds to support planning and programming of city-owned sites. But it really is pending completion of an acquisition strategy for the city. So, if we are kind of successful in completing that acquisition strategy within this biennium, we do have that funding in place to kind of support that planning effort. But we don't have a good sense of exactly when that timeline will be because we're still pursuing the acquisition strategy. And then City Council will direct whatever the engagement plan is around that planning effort, and it may include CAB. A lot or a little bit that will kind of be determined when we get to scoping that project. We're just not at the point as city staff of being able to scope that effort currently.
Can you explain a little bit what the acquisition strategy is all about?
We're acquiring land to hopefully co-locate a city hall, potentially a housing component.
It's not a planning effort. It is a negotiating. to
It's a
purchase real property.
And that's
I don't
why,
need to know anymore.
yeah, you're the lawyer. It's a secret. Yeah, so real estate transactions are private matters that the council doesn't typically share on the
And they
public
shouldn't.
sphere. Yeah,
I just describing it as a strategy. It sounded more like it was more of
a public,
a planning thing
yeah,
rather than a deal thing.
it's a deal thing.
Good.
And then I think, again, you brought up really great questions at your last meeting of, there's all these multiple efforts. If there's the city hall planning effort, if there's a stormwater master plan effort, if Parks is updating their comprehensive plan, how are we ensuring that kind of that core area vision is being maintained through multiple planning efforts and kind of bringing those cohesively together? Within a month, I haven't been able to give you like a crystal ball of how exactly we're going to solve all those issues, but I just wanted to reassure you that we brought this up in kind of our internal operations and leadership meetings. To make sure that that's kind of a question that we're asking ourselves internally. And I've been meeting individually with departments as they're scoping some of those larger projects, to make sure that we're incorporating that vision and that feedback into the scoping of some of these larger efforts.
That's the overall goal, right?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, as
Mhm.
long as it's in the forefront of people's minds, like, oh yeah, we gotta consider this, and it's not everybody's going off in their own direction. So that's good.
Yeah, and I think that there's opportunity for CAB to make recommendations to city council of, making sure that, that they do check in with you on certain components of some of, asking for them to check in with you on certain components of these projects, and we can kind of outline that in a letter of some sort, kind of outlining that work plan. So then I kind of scoped out just preliminary what I thought that those two new projects that we would want to kind of get council support of would be. So the first one is really that BCD code audit. So that would entail engaging some of the development community through stakeholder listening sessions, identifying barriers to some of those adaptive reuse projects in the BCD development code, and then evaluating any code amendments that could help remove those barriers, and then reviewing those recommendations with stakeholders, you all, and some of the development community. And then at that point, we could kind of propose code amendments to council for consideration. Are there questions about the code audit project or?
What, I
feedback
mean,
on
it
that?
it just seems like there's a lot of stuff coming through CFAC stuff that's kind of mandating, so I'm not really sure. I mean, how do we can't really do this independent of that, because we know stuff is coming, so.
Yeah,
It's evolving still.
I'll get to that. Yeah. Maybe I'll jump to this slide and then kind of go back to the street standards. So at your next meeting in June, we are going to have Brian Rankin and his staff present on the climate friendly area study. They're kind of getting to a point where they're more publicly launching that study and the work that they've been working on. But they're planning to kind of finalize this climate friendly area study by the end of this calendar year. You can kind of see on the map here. So this is kind of when the CFA study would be. I think kind of at the end of 2023, we'll have a lot better sense of what the potential CFA areas are, what parts of the core area are being considered for a CFA. Is it the whole core area? Is it the northern, is it the central part? Is it the northern part? So I think that will provide a lot more clarity into some of the CFA priority planning areas. So again, that's kind of part of the reason that we've cautioned on dedicating so much direction right now of like, how do we incorporate the core area into all of this planning effort? Because we kind of want to see how that CFA study, where that lands. So you'll get an update in June. And then I think in the fall, there'll be another opportunity for CAB to weigh into council before that CFA study is completed. And then following, and Brian will kind of provide a lot more update about this at your next meeting, but following that CFA study, they're planning on taking like another year to two to actually designate the climate friendly areas. And there's a lot of detailed work that goes into that actual designation process. Some of it does involve transportation planning work. So I think that there's opportunity for a lot of overlap, but again, it's kind of difficult to commit to something until we know what those CFA study areas are.
And there's no funding from the state to do any of that, right?
Nope. We
This is an executive order to.
did get a grant.
Hey, one of those unfunded
Actually, I
mandates.
think
Big
there's,
urgency to privilege.
ODOT,
I was gonna say there's 15
Earmarked.
mil, yeah.
$15 million to assist the counties and cities with, or the cities with climate friendly.
Oh,
With the
And
TSPs.
the challenge is, I don't think the funding's actually going to happen until.
Are those
next
the
year.
TGM grants?
No,
Okay.
it was a separate earmark out of the IIJA
Interesting.
funds.
Huh.
But I think there's a timing challenge, so it might not happen until 24.
ODOT just had a webinar on this today,
Oh,
so I
okay.
feel very prepared for this question.
Yay.
So they basically shared the schedule for the 8 major urban areas and the cities they're in, because they're technically required to have TSPs that are compliant with CFAC by 2029. So they've essentially started to schedule those out based on a number of criteria. Bend is in for the latter part of 2025 is when the work would kicked off. The contracting runs for about 6 months prior. So 2025, through 2028 would essentially be the TSP step, and tried to pin them down on like how much funding, who gets what, and they weren't ready to commit to numbers, but they said maybe around like 100K for like each jurisdiction, depending on like a variety of criteria, which I think we all know truly to update your TSP is quite north of 100K. So that's, there is funding, but it is limited. I think folks acknowledge like there's a gap here that needs to be filled. I think right now there's a pretty active conversation in the legislature around providing more funding for cities to do the CFA work, because it is underway with a lot of cities, and that some more money is really needed there to really help get those across the finish line. So
Well, it
That's-
seems a lot low to me if it's the same pot of money, because at the OTC, we approved $15 million for climate friendly. And so I don't know if that's the same program, or I'll find out.
yeah, we could find out. And I think the trick there was that it was trying to recognize that there's a kind of a cadre of cities that are technically on the hook for it, but that providing smaller jurisdictions that aren't in those urban areas that are under 5,000, that if they have a desire and a need to do that work, that they also should have
Some
the
of the
ability
money.
to tap into some of those resources. So I think that was a little bit of the kind of back of the napkin calculations of like who's getting what at this point. And I mean, and I'm couching that number with them saying it like, you know, don't quote us, right? But this is sort of what we're hoping or thinking this might look like a whole lot of qualifiers there of, you know, early days. So,
But our planning work is going in 2024, right?
Yeah, so that code audit would take place in 2024. And then kind of looking at some of the street standards. So it'd be kind of following the CFA study, but during the CFA designation process.
I think the other thing that's not up here that's gonna be a big deal is the housing needs analysis that's in 2024. So just like another, because so much of our housing need, the intent is to meet that need in the core area for a good deal of it, right? And the CFA even more so. So I think there's some additional kind of like threads to sort of track, you know, they all kind of like lead and thread through the core area. And so I think like my question about like the borough sort of city council, separate entities, but like budget constraints, resource constraints are shared across those agencies. And so who do we think, because Ally, maybe it's you, but it seems like there should be a sort of greater deal of ownership around who's responsible for making sure that all of these threads are connected. Because I think this body is expressed, like, we're very interested in how those all intersect and what have you. That may be limited by what staff's able and the resources available to do that. So I would be really interested in figuring out like who holds that responsibility. Is it borough? Is it the city? Is it both? Because I think it's really critical because there's so much happening of like who actually is going to be like held to account on how all of those threads show up here.
Colin.
I mean, I think like I'm kind of giving you all like a narrow scope view of like CAB's role in this, but
Yeah.
city council and city staff will be doing a housing production strategy for the city, like citywide. And so your focus is really on that core area component. You're a piece of this larger thing. So all of these projects are scoped to be citywide projects. The climate friendly area will likely, could include areas that are beyond the scope of the core area. And there are going to be staff assigned to that project, and they'll coordinate with the core area or urban renewal staff where there's overlap there. But they have this broader citywide context, whereas CAB has a very specific core area context. I don't think that like that larger vision or like these efforts are being coordinated. I just am trying to guide CAB into like your role is in this
Right.
geographic boundary. And these are citywide projects that will be evaluated at a citywide level. And there's a role for you as it relates to the core area to weigh in on that. But it's like to the whole project citywide, that's a city council item that you kind of individually can go weigh in on or get involved in whatever that city council designated process is for that larger citywide project. It may not always be directed to CAB to work on that project. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, and I think it's like, borough is really charged with the vision and borough is city council, right? Get that they're separate, but they're gonna have eyes on that with the purview right on the core area.
yeah, what's neat about the core is it has the funding tool to implement some of the cool stuff.
Well, I think you said it well in that there are threads that kind of come in. If you were looking at like a weaving, it gets most dense in the
Mhm.
central core and then it kind of frays out. But
Then you have to take that weaving and overlay it with a heavy-handed grid.
But, I think it's been said that all the departments here, that, we want to make sure that we're
Yeah.
not at cross purposes, that we're coordinated
Yeah.
and that we keep the vision in mind. And I agree with you. I think that probably the central core, at least a good part of it is probably going to be one of the CFAs. And that is where they really want to pump up the housing. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of overlap.
Yep.
Yeah.
Other comments or thoughts?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, if you wanna, that one, if you turn it on, it should work. There's like a little. Yeah, maybe test it. It sounds like it's working.
Yeah.
All right,
It's
Matt Stewart,
promising.
Real Estate Director. I just wanted to add, so something that kind of helps when you think about Borough and the city is separate. Borough is kind of the financial arm, so they're very restricted by the state and how they can approach the districts themselves. So I think it's important to think about Borough as the investment arm into this area. So they're kind of the piggy bank, and our investors are the taxing districts themselves that go into that. Also important, remember, we have Borough takes a long time to develop the dollars that we hope to spend. So in this early age, you've already done a great job. You've already allocated those dollars for the next few years of what we'd like to spend it on. It's also when we adopt the plans, the district plans themselves, we are reflecting on the existing planning documents that have been put into place. So kind of the things that you're talking about in the other work plan, wanting to do these other studies, the urban renewal plan has to reflect itself of those studies. So it kind of separates in that regard when you think about from the law standpoint. So we just enact what's already in place. So from that standpoint, we try to separate urban renewal TIF from city capacity and the fact that this is the investment arm that's supposed to enact the items that the city does. And that's how we talk about with councils. This is your investment strategy. This is your action strategy. This one's hopefully going to be able to enact what you come up with this one. And that's how we sort of separate it with them in terms of how we spend those dollars.
Super helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
And so our scope is really focusing on that financial arm and not on the ignite.
So I think-
strategy.
Yeah, so your
We talk a
role.
lot about the enactment strategy and it's like, no, your only role here is spend the money.
Yeah, yeah.
Your
So
primary role.
Yeah, your charge from Borough is how do we allocate these dollars, make those recommendations? How should we take whatever funds we make and put into it? And then your charge from the city is what should we be? How do we support that investment strategy itself through the different planning documents that go into place? And, Sharon brought up the city hall, and we have to keep that extremely separate because we didn't allocate any dollars towards public buildings. So that is very much a charge of the city. Whereas kind of everything else that supports the development of the core really can go towards Borough when it talks about financial investments.
So Matt, in your eyes then, our strategy is spending the money in order to make more money, right? It's the investment.
Yeah, that would be,
And things like City Hall, while ultimately a great catalyst, they actually hurt us in the short term because they take properties off.
one way to look at it, yes. Yeah, if you think about from purely the tax roll, anything that becomes a city
It's a short term.
or a government is a zero. Or we don't pay any property taxes on our properties that we own. So yeah, but I think the idea is from the council perspective is this can be a catalyst for the area. Therefore, can inject future investment dollar, which therefore increases our urban renewal spending.
But that would be if we were to comment on that, it would just be that.
Yeah.
It's the financial here that way.
Right.
And
If
this
that's
is-
from,
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
no,
No,
my
go
fault.
ahead.
I was gonna say, remember, we only had 1 year so far of returns and so far they look good. So it's hard for us to even predict out, like, are we gonna do well in year 5 through 7? We think so, because that's how we modeled it out, but we don't know. The challenge of urban renewals, we never know until the assessor puts out the tax rolls in October, November. Then we kind of go, okay, how much money do we have? But we always try to plan it out. So it's really, you guys have done a great job in developing the 5-year CIP. But if you remember, and I'm sure we talked about it, that, years 4 through 7 is when we get those larger chunk that we can really go make a whole lot of difference with.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that's why for the work plan that we're kicking around here, what it's really meant to do is identify barriers to the kinds of investments we want to see that really are about like driving up that TIF. So I think there's a really good and direct fit there for what we've kind of scoped in our work plan. Right? Because I mean, it's not like we allocated all the money and we did the CIP and like we can all kind of like walk away and we're done here. It's like this is sort of like mapping out like the next bits, right? To say, hey, here are the other places where we do need to invest or that we think, future investments could really help move the needle
Yeah.
or removing this barrier, right? Like we're gonna really help generate more of that TIF. So I think that that's, why we kind of find ourselves in the here and now.
Yeah, and I think kind of just keeping in mind too, like the council goals don't include like a BCD code audit in the council goal, like they include like a tree code development code update. The council goal around the core area is strategically invest in the core area, and CAB has been assigned to that item. But we could argue that you've already kind of completed that task through the development of the CIP and the programs you've already created. So these really are, we think that there's capacity to do these internally, but through a narrow scope approach. That's kind of what I was trying to rein in from the conversation at the last meeting of like, totally agree that would be awesome to do, but budgetarily wise and resource wise, we think that we can only fit in kind of these narrow scoped projects.
Any comments, questions?
I just want to say, I think the code audit is an important tool that we can use to help spur dollars growing more quickly, by identifying, and there may be no impediments, but I rather doubt it. So getting rid of the impediments is a big help to making more money. So it is a financial focus.
Okay.
Yes, it kind of ties into how do you want to use the urban renewal funds to pay for them, and how do we want to use the city funds to pay for it? I think your task of kind of balancing that, but that's what ultimately council / borough is balancing at the same time. Which dollar do
You want to use city funds.
Yeah. Noted.
So then I just kind of wanted to give an overview of what I thought that again, kind of more narrower scope street standards project would entail, just so you kind of had a better understanding of where city staff thinks that project could go and get your input on that. But this would really be kind of a high level project where we're identifying a high level vision for the priority core area streets. So what are those streets that we think that we would want to implement, like a different implementation mechanism than some of our existing street standards in the code. And I think this would be an opportunity where we would evaluate, what is the feasibility of a linear park concept or a no car street concept. And we're recommending to kind of hold off on this project until 2024 so that we can identify potential synergies with the climate friendly area designation process. If there is synergy to be had, probably, but we don't fully know yet. And then we would be identifying kind of just planning level 5 cost estimates for those streets, and not necessarily getting into design of the street, but just kind of understanding high level, what is the vision for the street? What is the circulation impacts if we were to do a no car street in the area? Is that feasible? There are certain streets where access may not even be feasible with a no car street. You might need to have at least a one way in order for lots on that street to have access. So kind of just doing a little bit deeper analysis into that. And then we'd evaluate some of the implementation options. So I think you all have brought up multiple times a payment in lieu of option on some of those streets so that developers aren't burdened with building a really nice street for 30 feet of frontage, that they kind of pay into something for the city to come in and do a larger corridor project. So that's kind of, we'd be doing kind of more high level visioning for the street to identify where there are opportunities to do some code changes to allow, again, to remove some of those barriers to development. And then again, that would lead to potential code amendments for council consideration. So that's kind of where we see that project. I think we'll continue to evaluate as the stormwater master plan moves further forward, or as parks moves further forward in their planning efforts, continue to coordinate with those different departments and those groups to find as much synergy as we can to kind of help this project. But this is, again, kind of proposing a little bit more of a narrower scope project for this based on some of the input that we've heard from you since the beginning of this board being created. Does that make more sense? And this is kind, I think, just kind of, I'm working on like 3 development agreements where we have a core area CIP project where we're trying to defer them doing those improvements to the CIP project. And so we're trying to kind of make it so that we don't have to do these, like,
Each
you know,
at a time.
each individual
Yeah.
project has this legally, like legal cost to it every single time. Like,
Right.
how do we identify an easier process to spur the development on those streets that we think that we can feasibly fund?
So then are you fast tracking that effort to find a way to not have to repeat it every time? Because it sounds like.
We're
it's
working
an
on,
immediate thing.
yeah, we're working on two that we're using very similar language on, at least. So kind of like two birds with one stone, at least for that. But no, it's not like super streamlined, I wouldn't say.
Well, that, it is a real impediment and it makes total sense. Other communities that I've worked in have always had that option and it's just, I'm surprised it's not an option here already. I just encourage whoever to make it a priority because it'll speed things up. And as a potential developer coming in, knowing that they can do that versus having to make those improvements could make the difference between the project going from pie in the sky to feasible. So.
I'm gonna advocate on behalf of the city for a minute. Don't fall out of your chairs. The problem with that is, right now, the city with the GO bond, they have so many projects that they are trying to deliver. And they have more work than they can deliver right now anyway. So one of the challenges of having an in lieu fee, which I've been an advocate for, is that then that adds one more project to the city's list that they are having challenges delivering anyway. So I just thinking in terms of just the capacity to do that work. Sometimes it is faster and more cost effective for the development community to do it than to have the city do it.
So does the city ever contract with a third party to deliver a street to
All
it
the
seems
time.
like if the
All the time.
funding is there.
They still have to have the internal project managers and, it's just a lot of work. And how many millions of dollars are we trying to deliver? The city's trying to deliver.
195 million for the GO bond,
Right.
just the
That's
GO
just a
bond.
lot of.
No, I hear you. I know what you're saying. It's just with the cost of land and the kind of crazy interest rates we have and that they're only probably going to go up. It just trying to be realistic and get things moving, but it is definitely it's a balancing for sure.
Well, and it sounds like part of this it's like for the folks who are the leading edge, it's not gonna help them, right? Because they're out there doing it now and you're doing 3 different agreements and hopefully we arrive in a place through our work where that does, if not sooner, right? That it gets more streamlined, right? And it's more direct and, there's improvements there, right? And that's more like able to plan, right? Knowing you've got that tool and that streamlined piece, like in future project planning that happens at the city level, right? So I think, good to have it up there. Kind of the thing of like, would be great if we had it yesterday. But, right now it sounds like, for the 3 that are rolling, kind of doing the best we can to like get those moving forward.
Yeah, I agree though, it's a priority because there is a bit of a chilling effect in the development community, knowing it's something, a project might be on the CIP, knowing that that'll take place unless you do the developer agreement or that's on the table. You're just going to wait until the city is going to come in and do the infrastructure. Not all the time, but it's definitely a factor. And so I think to mitigate that chilling effect of putting things on the CIP that we're doing, you have an avenue that's easy, like you're talking about, can be beneficial because it is great. I'm in one of those development agreements and it's a positive experience, but it's cumbersome and it takes time. There's carrying costs associated with that. And so streamlining that and taking away that chilling effect from the development community, I think would be good.
So just strategically, if it's having all these little earmarked funds for sidewalks on Second Street or whatever, I can understand the administration of it. Is there any way that those funds can just sort of come to the borough and be part of the strategic construction of streets? Funds that just get added. So we basically, the city, I guess, would make a decision that, yeah, we can live with these streets as they are until their renewal district decides how to best build streets here. Then they're just.
Those are the types of questions I'd like to evaluate in 2024. Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly kind of the question. I'd have to coordinate with legal on, how we would structure anything like that, but it probably would, anyway, there's a lot of details that would need to get figured out through that effort, which is why we're proposing to
Do it next year.
do it next year. Yeah.
Yes, can you go back one slide? I had one question for this group, to the map of the priority streets. So I think it's what, like Second, Hawthorne, Franklin, Greenwood lit up there, right? So, right, so is
Right.
First Street like contemplated for this project or not? Like, I know I think it's come up in some past conversations, like, is First Street on the table in this kind of current scoping or no?
Again, I think that would kind of be an opportunity for us to evaluate in that 2024 effort of, is it First Street just between Greenwood and Franklin? And I think we have to balance it with what can the TIF feasibly support, because the payment in lieu of is probably not going to fully fund these projects. So you need to kind of balance, you need to create reasonable assumptions for how much of that in lieu of fee you'll collect, and then how much would TIF be able to fund those projects in the future, and recognize that you might be saying this project won't get built for 15 years, but we don't want to make this developer build their portion of the frontage. We'll come in and do it in 15 years. So I think that those are kind of the conversations that we would have in that evaluation. We did do some of that work to identify kind of high level visions for the streets in the core area. We did develop sort of a vision for First Street. So we'd probably use that as a starting point
Yeah.
to review and build on.
Great, thank you.
Your renewal district is better off if we do that, because then we get the tip from whatever gets built on Fourth Street. So otherwise, the property just sits there and doesn't help us out.
Yeah.
Yeah, for next year.
Something to talk about next year.
For next year.
Let's move along.
I think First Street should be just walking pedestrian only. I'll just put it out there. There's nothing to do.
Other questions, comments, thoughts?
So I guess we can kind of discuss this item a little bit, but the goal would be to get direction from you all and kind of what you'd like to include in a letter to both borough and council as far as your priority work plan items. We've already kind of outlined this as staff, so you could just kind of direct us to outline the letter based on this presentation. But if there's specific things that you want to call out, I think you all brought up really great questions and ideas at the last meeting. So we would draft that letter of staff and then bring it back to for you for review at your next June meeting.
Do folks have discussion here before we give that direction? Are folks generally on board with directing staff to put together a letter that reflects the presentation that we've seen today?
What's the question?
Are we ready to give staff direction to put together a letter about what our future work plan will be for CAB based on the presentation we've seen today? I'm good. A thumbs up. Guess a thumbs up. Folks over here, yeah, John?
I mean, I guess I'm trying to, it's interesting because in some ways, we're 10 years behind where we need to be. Like, we've been talking about this for a decade. And if we'd had the completeness of vision and the design complete on a lot of these streets, wouldn't be in a spot where the development that's trying to happen is being encumbered by the planning efforts that are still being figured out. And so I'm understanding the narrowing and curtailing of scope, and what the actual role of CAB is in this whole thing.
John, you might need to talk a little bit more into your mic.
No,
Sorry.
I'm just rambling, so I don't have anything salient to say, but I guess I'm a little disappointed at how long it takes and how many different channels that things seem to have to back eddy through in order to come up with a plan that works and that assists in development. And so I'd like to facilitate that however we can as a quasi judicial body that is in our capacity. And I trust that we've shaped that as best we can. But I'm just kind of processing and learning about some of the nuance there. So it's just a general comment, I guess.
Yeah, and I think something, just for the benefit of folks tuning in or, where we've been on the master planning issue, which I think, is kind of what I'm interpreting, kind of what you're getting at there, that if we'd had something like that, perhaps that had given a little bit more of this direction early out, we wouldn't be in a spot where there's 3 different development agreements, happening on a street where we have a CIP project and now they're kind of stuck behind that. So I think like we talked a lot as a group, especially when we were figuring out what the CIP was and where we're spending money about. Should we, shouldn't we on a master plan? And I know that there was never great consensus here, right? And so I think that there's pros and cons, people are in different places on it. And I think unfortunately what we found was that ultimately this was a resource limited thing, right? Where going back to city staff and really trying to figure out like, what would it take to do it well? What do we actually have resources for? It's just something that, isn't doable at this point. And so I think that for those of us who see the merits and want to move forward with a master planning kind of effort, that's tough. So.
In realizing the limitations of the resources and the inefficiencies of the process that make the resources go less far than you think they might. Right?
I will say, I meet with a lot of developers or, interested people, there's a lot of people with interest in the central district and the core area, and I meet with them regularly, and there's kind of some frequently asked questions that come up. And I think that you all have, through the business assistance program and development assistance program, have established some great priorities for the core area that aren't necessarily communicated very clearly on like our website or materials. So I think that there could be, direction to develop more communication tools to support outreach efforts. I think that's kind of some of the goals that I heard from you about that master planning effort is communication tools. And so I do think that there's potential opportunities to develop some of those communication tools based on the programs that we've established. And maybe that's an area that I could see CAB weighing in on, of like, we want better communication resources, right? To communicate to the development community, like what's the development that we're seeking here? What, how do you tie into this vision? And that can be done at a lower budget, right?
Well, that seems like a good idea.
I came up with it today. No.
And I applaud the city for whoever they're using in-house for their visuals. They've put together a lot of really good, for all of us visual learners, they've put together a lot of great diagrams and things like that. And I think that if you could, not just verbiage, but that type of thing would be, I think, helpful and maybe reach a broader audience out there. That not everybody is used to reading like 60-page documents. If we can summarize things in good visuals and then have other questions answered later, just to get the interest out there, I think that would be great.
To that point, maybe what John was also getting at, to external communication, but also internal communication. All of the different branches of the city, kingdoms, if you will, them all being on sort of a shared vision for this district too, I think could really help the process. As someone who's going through a development now, it's definitely been a barrier to entry, and something that I don't know if people would expect, given how much work we've done in the core area and the central district in general. So maybe that's what you meant with the back booing and all that, but. Sorry to cut you.
No, it's okay. That's really good input. It would probably be good if you could be more specific, not maybe here, but.
It can be.
So how do folks, okay, so really great discussion and comments. Is there anything that's come up here from folks in this last bit that we feel like we want to highlight, include, right? Because the question in front of us is, are we ready to provide staff with direction to move forward with putting a letter together that outlines our proposed work plan? And then we'll have a chance to review that, and then that will need to go to Borough and City Council for approval. So basically, the question in front of us is, based on the presentation we've seen, direct staff to put a letter together that reflects what we've seen. Is there, and it sounds like I saw nods that yes, that's correct. Now, the additional question is, do we have anything else based on the conversation that we've just had that we also want to put in that letter?
Yeah, what else can we help with? I mean, I trust Ally's perspective of what the capacity is for staff and for our context. There's a million other things that I'd love to contribute to, but I would really defer to staff on what is possible and appropriate, because it is all resource constrained and time constrained, so I guess I trust that what was put together is the best outline of what we can do. But if we've got more space, let's take on more.
Okay, and I don't know, it feels like the communication stuff, right, that we talked about and some of the kind of like internal and external communication pieces, right? Like, I'm not quite sure how to capture that in this work planning letter. Other than to say it's a good idea and we think that it has merit, and to the extent that our work plan would need to include that or address it, it feels like that might be more about flagging it for the city, right? Of saying, hey, like, this is something that's come up, right? It's not necessarily specific to our work plans, but improve communications around like the vision, like a dusting off of like all the visioning stuff that happened with like the body that was convened before us, right? It's sort of like a stronger communication plan about what we're up to and what the vision is and how these programs that we just launched are fantastic for achieving that vision, right? So better, robust kind of like external comms on that, but then also making sure as folks start working through this process, right, they're hitting internal barriers, right? And that's like the experience of developers who are trying to move forward. And so, to the extent, Ally, you can relay that to your internal team, and I'm sure those discussions are things, that's probably not an infrequent topic. But just trying to make sure that has like a way that input has a hold, right? And that you hear it and are able to relay it to the appropriate people, in the city. Does that feel about right?
When I wonder
Okay.
if, obviously doing a master plan effort that we've kind of talked about, like, hey, if we figure out, for example, what our pedestrian oriented streets are, can that help in our forward-looking developments and in the city planning process that's going to ultimately help developers make their projects? I wonder if that's not a full scale, hire a master plan consultant, spend a whole bunch of money on going through that process, or if there's a more toned down way that this body is utilized in starting with public outreach and starting with public conversation about the priorities that the people of Bend have around different ped-friendly streets and just ideas around the cab, like in terms of that master plan vision, like can we take on as part of our work plan kind of a more high level look at that instead of a more detailed dive into, I think that's kind of what was proposed in there with that. I'm not familiar with what planning level 5 documents are, but
It's just cost estimates that are 50 to 150% accurate, or 50% lower than the cost assumed, or 150% higher than the cost assumed.
like,
We think it's gonna cost this much.
Well, I think that what you put on the slide for looking at the streets, that's the kind of high level thing that is within our capacity. And I think it makes sense to do for next year. I think trying to do a master plan vision for the core area is way beyond our scope, and it's kind of difficult for a government body to master plan private development. So I think we should, unless you're using the term master plan in a different way, that's
Yeah.
really not what we should be doing. What we should be doing is looking at the high level, what is our vision for these major streets? And I think it's appropriate for us to do that.
And maybe part of the communication piece is, it's not just a one-way communication, it's two-way communication. So, we would be getting input from people who are interested in maybe doing something in the central core, as well as the city making better information available. And that, you were asking about, well, can we survey people about pedestrian streets or something like that? I mean, it could be that there are like some tickler questions that are part of this communication that would elicit interesting responses. I mean, it doesn't have to be specifically about any specific street or a plan, but get a feel for what does the community want. Yeah, it could be part of that is the communication.
Yeah, I'm curious, that's something that we can help with or start.
I mean, I think my take on comms related stuff is that it's a ton of work, right? And so I think that it's like, yes, we're saying do better externally, do better internally, but particularly for like external communications related stuff, like, I mean, that is so it's like we're working in a very resource constrained environment. I think what Ally has brought to us today is like we reached and sort of are interested in a lot of things, and she's trying to sort of deliver a message that is based on internal conversations, based on resources available. This is an appropriate and doable scope for this body in the next biennium. So I feel like that's what we're being presented with. Again, like that reality can be tough, right? Like if we had made different choices about the CIP, about where we wanted to allocate money, then maybe master planning at that level could potentially still be on the table, but at this juncture, it's not. So I think that, you know,
Sounds like we're ready to go.
I think I think we're there. I think we're there. So
In the interest
Yeah.
of time, we better move along.
yeah, so I think hopefully I want folks to feel heard. I feel like there's some things that we've raised that are good, sort of general things to keep in mind. I think that it sounds like folks are in agreement that what we've seen in the presentation today is what we'd like to direct staff to put a letter together on for what our work plan will be.
Yeah, and I think once you kind of see it put together,
Yeah.
you'll be able to provide a little bit more directive input. It's a little bit nebulous right now, but I think at the next meeting, you'll be able to provide a little bit more concrete input. There'll be another opportunity to review it.
All right, thanks for
Okay,
bringing us
yeah.
in. All right. Good, it's good. Okay, well, then we are gonna move on to the next item on our agenda, assistance programs update. So like we've mentioned, we have our development assistance and business assistance programs that have been approved by Borough. And so now this is the latest iteration of what is going on with that work as we get ready to roll these out publicly and open up the application process.
Yeah, so speaking of staff capacity, so we're working on a bunch of things to get these programs up and running. So kind of just wanted to, nothing is available to really share yet, but just kind of wanted to give status updates on where we're at with everything. So we have draft web pages that have been developed that we're reviewing internally before we can launch them live. I'm hoping by your June meeting, we have those web pages live that you could review and provide input on. We're drafting the application questions, program flyers. Those would be developed both in English and Spanish. And we're also presenting to the Human Rights and Equity Commission next week to get their input on how to ensure that these programs are accessible and any input that they have on how to better reach communities that might want to access these programs. We're modifying a contract with Yannette, who did the previous work, to offer translation and application assistance for this program, at least in Spanish. We do have contracts for translation assistance if somebody were wanting to apply in another language, but we don't necessarily have a person that we could utilize like in Mandarin for application support, but we do have that in place. We will have that in place for at least Spanish speaking businesses that want to apply. And so we'll probably, how we're imagining that is that we would actually host like 2 office hours where that consultant would be available to any business that wanted to apply, where they would walk them through the application question by question and provide any translation needed to put that application in. And then I don't have the exact dates of when the application will open. It kind of depends on how far I get before I leave on parental leave. And at the next meeting, I'll kind of do a little bit more formal update on just staffing updates, especially while I'm out. But Matt Stewart, our real estate director, is also overseeing a lot of urban renewal, and he's planning to hire an urban renewal TIF project manager that would be supporting these programs long-term. That should probably start in July or August, fingers crossed. That would kind of be taking over the management of these programs while I'm out. And then Ben Hemson was recently promoted as our new economic development manager. So he'll also be available and probably leading CAB meetings while I'm out as well. So, but I'll have both of them here and kind of introduce those roles at the next meeting. So the applications will be open generally summer through fall, hoping to launch by early July. But we'll kind of see just where everything falls. We've been exploring a software program that affordable housing uses to run the application program through, but
Neighborly? Yeah.
Neighborly,
Mhm.
but we're still kind of evaluating whether we want to use that for this. And then in November and December, that's when we would actually be having the applicants kind of do their presentations, doing the application scoring with CAB or the Borough CAB scoring team, depending on the program, and then providing the preliminary funding recommendations. And then January is when we think we would schedule the actual funding approvals with Borough. So that's kind of the tentative schedule for these programs. It might result in like an extra CAB meeting in early November, where we kind of do 2 meetings to review the applications and score within like a week, but we'll keep you updated on any of those schedule changes. And try not to schedule them like right around the holidays. Any questions on these programs? If you get people interested in the programs and the timing, just send them to me. We'll definitely at least have the web pages launched by the time I'm out. And so you can kind of direct folks to those web pages. If they're interested, we're hearing from a lot of we're going to get way more applications than we have funding for. I'm already hearing from a lot of businesses,
Really? Oh, that's great.
which is exciting, but also a little bit nerve wracking. But yeah, they're coming out of the woodworks. I'm like, I've got contacts for M&J Tavern now. You know, they're all coming out. They're like, you have money?
Yeah, nothing brings people out
I'm
like
like,
money.
we have less money than you want. But there's definitely going to be significant interest, especially in the business assistance program, I think.
So when are you going to pick the 3 people to do the evaluations? Or-
Excuse me, I can't hear the question. Could Kathy speak into the mic? Thank you.
Sorry, is this working? Can you hear me now? I guess so. There's just going to be 3 people that are going to be evaluating, correct?
Yeah, we'll
When does that
probably
happen?
have CAB select those 3 folks at either your September or October meeting.
Okay. Mhm.
The idea was they were gonna be those without conflicts.
That would be ideal.
Kind of
Yeah.
narrows it down a bit.
Mhm.
Yeah, sorry. And we would finalize at least the CAB members that are serving on that prior to any new CAB members so we would finalize that process in the 2023 year before new CAB members started in 2024. But the borough recommendation may take place in 2024.
Thanks, Sally. Other questions, comments, thoughts on?
Have you had much interest from the development assistance program?
Uh-huh, yeah.
These timelines. As fast as we can do it, but I'm just wondering if this schedule is. built
It's
around
not
any-
fast enough for any of them, but they'll take it. Yeah, we are expecting applications from the Les Schwab site on Franklin Avenue, so Project PDX, Killian Pacific, and the Timber Yards Master Plan at least, or the Timber Yards developers.
Wow, timber yards too.
Yeah.
Exciting times. All right. Well, that's good. It's, I think we all knew like the need was there, but it's nice to see that playing out in reality in real time.
You will have no fun. You'll have no problem allocating funding. There will
Oh,
be,
no, it'll be.
they will come.
Yeah, but the decision making
Mhm.
of how to do, because at AHAC, we always have like 3 times the amount of ask of the money that we have, and trying to figure that out is always a challenge, and everybody deserves it, but there's only so much to go around, so.
Spreading it too thin doesn't really help.
But yeah, you have to make some pretty hard decisions, so.
All right, looking forward to that. All right, well, I think then we're done with that agenda item. We'll go ahead and move on to performance metrics and annual report.
Yeah, so I attached kind of the draft 2002 annual report for you, and just wanted to highlight that we did find like some errors or reframed some of the targets that I showed kind of in highlighted language. So we, based on direction from Corey and Elisa, when we were developing the dashboard, we reframed the targets from like a target of net new housing units that we were trying to solve to like a total number of housing units, because it just matches a little bit better the data sources that we're using to track it. So instead of the targets being framed as like 385 net new housing units, we're proposing to reframe that target to be 607 total housing units in the core area. And then we found some errors when we were looking at the Franklin count data, the data set that a staff person had provided didn't match some of the existing data. We weren't able to kind of recreate it in the format that she did. So we now have a software program that we're using a consistent data formatting opportunity that seems like maybe the data that she had sent was just an error. So all those Franklin permanent counter data all of that was updated. And we actually found that the pedestrian bicycle mode split ended up being higher than we initially had calculated it as. And so the 2022 year, we actually saw like a 4.9% mode split of ped bike trips combined. So we're recommending to increase the target to 8% instead of keeping it at 5% since we're already at the 5% mode split. So if you're all good with that, we can kind of finalize the draft. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of those updates before it got finalized.
What's the date on that? The 607 total and the 8%?
I'd have to go look at hold on.
I mean, 8% might be low for 20 years from now.
Hold on.
I mean, that's a
So for the housing, the goal is 607 total housing units by 2028 and 1,819
Oh,
by
this
Yeah.
2040.
Yeah.
okay. I wasn't sure.
Those are, you
Yeah, and then the Franklin
you.
mode split is a separate performance metric.
Right.
So the goal is that pedestrian and bicycle
2030.
trips make up 8% of trips by 2030.
Okay.
know, those are hand in hand. I mean, the more housing we have in this area, the more. So,
Well, and the, less scary the crossings are. the
There's
more
that help-
bike
that's
rides
pretty
you're gonna
helpful,
get,
too.
So it's all. like,
We are
these
looking-
depending on, make it easy to walk and bike.
mhm. I would hope we can get that housing goal of 2040 completely knocked out of that park, and same thing with the one by 2028.
Yeah.
It seems like, in the next 3 or 4 years, we'll have that, which I guess is in that scopes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there'll be opportunity to update the housing targets when we update our housing needs analysis as well.
Yeah.
Is anyone else feel that bike head split goal is low? And that maybe doesn't really matter too much, but it seems like with the urgency at which the climate friendly and equitable. The urgency at which the general planet needs us to change how we move people and goods, it might be a little low to try to get 3% by then.
Excuse me, can I get John to speak closer to the mic?
Sorry, yeah.
Thank you.
That's here can hear me. I can't tell when the mic's picking it up. But I guess my general question, my gut feeling was that maybe a 3% increase by 2030 seemed like a low goal. And I don't know how much that matters, but to me, that seems low. Let's throw that up there.
I would feel that way too. I have no basis though, so it's kind of 10%, 15%. To me, it's a very nebulous kind of black box in a way. I don't know how to, I don't have the basis.
I think I'm fine with leaving that as is for now. I mean, I think that these are things that we, in theory, could adjust over time. I am interested in the CFA implications, right? Because some of that inherent in that is going to be VMT, right? And really looking at like, what does your mode split start to look like based on, where your housing units are? And, so I feel like there may be some things that as we step into that we start to learn, hey, like some of these targets around our housing, some of these targets around how folks are traveling merit some readjustment based on some of these new parts of the puzzle. So, I mean, I think that is very much an open door. But I think for now, I'm probably okay with the 8, but I agree. I think there's some things coming that might make that a little low, but okay. For
Yeah,
now.
part of the CFA designation requires the cities to establish performance metrics for the CFA areas. So if you wanted to raise it to 10 or, I'm comfortable with adding a higher target. But I think we'll probably evaluate it with more robust data or like make a more informed decision through that CFA effort.
And I feel like when we did make that, I didn't focus too much on it personally. I could say that definitively, but I guess the question is philosophically, are we trying to make goals or metrics that are easily achievable and something that makes us feel good? Not saying that that's bad or good, or ones that are somewhat unobtainable or harder to obtain, something to like a North Star for us to go towards. I think that's for me, the bedrock of how we choose to make those goals.
In my mind, the performance metrics are are we hitting our primary goals in the core area? And for me personally, a lot of those center around transportation. And if we're planning correctly and incentivizing the right things and doing the right types of transportation projects, which that's the biggest thing. We've already decided how to put our the monies towards projects that we think are most influential for that realm. And the metrics should show that that's working. So for me, that seems like it could be raised, but I don't know how important that actually is when they're going to be reassessed based on the that climate friendly areas and.
So okay with leaving it at 8, or do we want to, folks want to nudge it up a bit? Any other comments or thoughts?
I think
Preferences?
we should wait to see what the climate friendly initiative, what those targets are and then update it.
It begs the question, if you're gonna raise it, then what are we gonna do to try to meet it?
Right.
We don't have that in place yet.
It feels a little arbitrary just to.
Probably. We've already done.
Yeah.
we've already done the pieces that.
Well, it sounds like good with what is outlined there on the slides. Keep moving along here. I think next up is public comment. We don't have anybody here in the room unless Matt wants to put on a different hat. Anyone online who would like to make public comment?
We have one attendee. I don't see them raising their hand.
All right, well. Then we will close public comments and move on to our last item, which is next meeting and information sharing.
Yeah, so we'll meet June 15th. Kind of the main agenda item is hearing an update on the climate friendly area study work that's going on with our growth management division. So you all can kind of get a better sense of where that project is. I'm excited to hear the presentation too. And then we'll also kind of bring back the letter for your work plan priorities and provide any more program updates about the assistance programs. We're not planning on having any July or August meetings, but you would return in September for your next CAB meeting after that June date. And then just wanted to let you all know that the Timber Yards Master Plan did receive Planning Commission approval at the last Planning Commission meeting. And then they are scheduled to go to City Council on June 7th for their public hearing for that master plan.
It's exciting.
What kind of timeline are they on for their, when they?
They're planning to submit their subdivision and then the site plan applications for the first 2 phases of the site. So the hotel site and then one of the mixed use sites immediately following approval. Yeah, I think it'll be an 8 to 12 year build out of the first,
Oh, the first two phases.
the 24 acre piece.
Oh.
What's the status of the sewer lift station there that was needed? Is that?
They
being-
have to build it.
They
Yeah.
have to build it, but,
Mhm.
and they're paying 100% for that? Or?
If they upsize it, like I'm working on their development agreement as well. Just reviewed it today. So, if they upsize it past the lift station enforcement needs for their site, any of that upsizing cost is eligible. Or, city staff would recommend an SDC, amendment to our SDC list for sewer to add that to the list so that they could receive SDC credits for that upsizing portion. But they're responsible for the costs of this pump station to serve that site.
It seemed to my memory, if my memory is serving me, that cost was a big impediment to anything happening in that area for years, right? But obviously it's worth it to them to do, so that's a good thing, but just.
Yeah, and
It's a
then
big ticket item.
We're also recommending a couple transportation SDC amendments to offer SDC credits for transportation SDCs. So 2 of the roundabouts that they'll be responsible for constructing fall kind of on that Ani corridor that has the GEO bond funding. So we offer the credits for that project. It doesn't really have a financial impact to the city because it was going to be funded through the GEO bond. So it just provides more funding back to the GEO bond. And then some of the improvements that they're proposing on Sizemore would be SDC creditable.
Excuse me, Chair, Counselor Perkins has her hand raised.
Perkins?
Hi, sorry I can't be there and sorry I don't have my camera on. I have 3 sick kids and this mom is not looking so great. I just wanted to update you all on the Franklin Avenue shelter, formerly known as the Rainbow. For those that didn't catch last night, we approved a 18-month contract to Shepherd's House to reopen the shelter. It is going to be not a congregate shelter like the other Shepherd's House shelter is. It is people are going to be coming in through the continuum of care and the coordinated entry system, meaning it's not just a first come, first serve shelter, but it is ready to go and actually will be opening to the first families on Monday. And just wanted to let you all know.
Thanks, Counselor Perkins. City Council also approved a new middle income housing program last night as well. That I think is funded with $500,000 to offer incentives for middle income housing.
Yeah, and actually it's a report thing, but I'm on that technical advisory committee, and if we're really looking for blue sky ideas, so.
For what advisory?
Well, for the middle market, I don't know what we're called now, but
Middle
that middle income, yeah.
income.
And so we're going to have a request for information and then a request for proposals. And the request for information, if you have ideas on how we can support middle market housing, or anybody that's doing that kind of work, get them alerted to that, this is going to be coming out. And it could be not necessarily construction of the housing, perhaps it's it could be helping with mortgages for people purchasing, it could be rental assistance, it could be land acquisition loan that gets paid back, or just a lot of different ways of looking at it, because it's a difficult nut to crack and we really want to get a lot of different ideas. So just want to put it out there.
And would folks contact Carrie or send?
Yes.
So I can provide the staff contact for that effort. It's Carrie Bell, but I can send it out.
Is it like a grants-based program? Is it?
It's using funding from the general fund to kind of kickstart up and pilot this program.
So it isn't necessarily a revolving fund, because the money that if we were to loan money and get paid back, it goes right into the general fund. And there's no guarantee it would stay in that $500,000 pot. But at the same time, we are looking at the potential of having something that could be a revolving fund. And we're hoping that some of this funding coming down from the state that's also trying to address this income level, it might be something, if we show that we are successful and we have created a program that works, that we could attract more money from the state and keep going. And that's the hope. And you might ask yourself, what committee am I not on? But yeah, it's very worthwhile doing so.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Other updates to share, information, things that folks want this group to be aware of?
I'm excited about timber yards moving forward. That's such a great infusion. Just a general comment, not an update,
Yeah.
but it's just it's so exciting that that much investment is going into the area that's included in the TIF and juice the urban renewals monies that we're planning to use.
Yeah, I can provide, I'm working on a TIF estimate for them for their council presentation, so I can provide that at the next meeting too, just so you kind of get a sense of the impact of that project.
It'd be very
Okay.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna hit our ceiling pretty quick, I would guess. So, do we start talking about that? Or is it
Well,
too
we
soon?
will at some point. Yeah. When I've done the initial estimates, it definitely will put us over, I think, faster than we initially anticipated, but they are also planning to apply for MUPD for several of the phases of the development. So that would lower the revenue generation.
Is the other construction going on there right now also?
That's the Killian Pacific project.
Oh,
So
okay.
their demolition permits and are starting some of the sewer work, I believe.
Are they in the?
They are. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the first one, actually.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's right.
Were there any MUPTI updates?
You mean a update?
Update. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, so we've received one MUPTI application so far. It was a little tenuous out of the gate, an update. It was a little tenuous out of the gate. We kind of have been coordinating with the taxing districts on a approval process, and that first application was a project outside the TIF area. We've received a little bit more support for projects within the TIF area, where there's less of a financial impact, or, there's the financial impact has already been determined within that area. And so that project, I think, was a little bit unique. They've actually put their application on pause. This is the micro unit project on Penn Avenue, so it's outside the core area. They put their application on pause so they could evaluate adding more units to their site now that there are no parking minimums in the city. So we're hoping to get a revised application from them once they kind of finish that evaluation. And then we have met with 3 other developers on the MUPTI program that are interested in applying within 2 within the core area. So the Killian Pacific project is planning to apply for MUPTI, and then the Les Schwab Franklin project is planning to apply for MUPTI.
Oh, I do have another update. I'm on another technical advisory group about the SDCs. And it's very exciting. We're really looking at reducing the SDCs for the smaller homes and increasing them for the larger homes. You have to keep the same total, but designating in 6 different brackets, which is very exciting. But part of the conversation also had to do with potentially adjusting SDCs based on location. And some discussion came up about maybe reducing them in the central core for housing. And I want to just say that I care a lot about the central core, but I also care a lot about affordable housing. And my feeling was that we're doing enough to get excitement going on in the central core, that what would happen would be that it would raise SDCs on housing anywhere else in the city by a significant amount if we were to do that. And I weighed in saying that I didn't think that that was necessarily the right way to go, that we have enough happening that's encouraging development in the central core. And development of housing is so dependent on opportunity and what land becomes available, what's feasible. And I didn't want to see it negatively impacting housing happening elsewhere in the city. So I just want to let you know, I personally weighed in on not doing that, even though you might think I would say, oh yeah, great idea for central core. But looking at it holistically, I think in terms of housing, it didn't make sense. And I just wanted to let you know that. But it's still an ongoing conversation. It's going to be meeting about non-housing development next. And oh my gosh, apparently there's like 64 different classifications if you were coming in for SDCs for commercial properties.
Yeah.
And it's insane.
Mhm.
And they really want to simplify that. And it was a fire hose of information on the last meeting, I'll tell you. And it's really good that they are looking at this because it is a disincentive for development. And so that will help us as well, though, I think, in the central core.
But Kathy, maybe it'd just be simpler if you told us which committees you're not on. I've lost track.
Be on that tree committee too, so.
Collect them all.
She's branching out.
Yeah, but I am rolling off the I will say I'm rolling off the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee this June. So I have June is my last meeting. So I figured, okay, well, I can take on the thing, so.
I really appreciate the SDC update and all of your service on these committees, but
Uh-huh.
is a big one. And I do know that it's hard for developers, and I'm glad that's getting an overhaul. And I appreciate the input that it's gonna impact housing citywide and may not be appropriate in the core. That makes sense to me as well.
Thank you, John.
A question about Dale's question and more of a practical question about the limit. Because I was always thinking that the limit of borrowing that we have, or the top end borrowing that we can do is we're going to run into that too. What's the practical steps for us to take when that does occur? How long does it take? It has to go through Borough, but what is the practical steps-ish to that, so that we have somewhat of a runway when that occurs, because I think it's going to creep up quick, and we don't want to be caught proverbially with our pants down.
Yeah, I'll start to answer that question. If I miss anything, Matt is pretty familiar with that process because he's gone through it. But it's a major amendment to the urban
Yeah.
renewal plan, so it does require borough action. I think you even have to notice again to the taxing districts and provide them an opportunity to comment on the amendment. Yeah, maybe Matt will just, there are options for minor amendments when you kind of modify the boundary by less than a percentage of the total boundary area or 10. You do less than a percentage change to the boundary area.
Less than 1%.
That's a minor amendment and it can just be approved by borough. You probably want to do some outreach to your taxing districts if you were to go through that, but a major amendment, if you're changing the maximum indebtedness, does require a lot
It's a
more.
big deal.
Yeah,
I think the thing to remember with this plan is we actually have the 30-year limit is when we're supposed to actually prepay all the debt back off. So us actually accelerating is not a terrible thing. It can mean we can actually meet that deadline to pay everything off. Therefore, we actually are achieving the maximum amount that we've taken out. Few things to keep in mind is even if we actually exceed that amount, we can still bank it if we can't seem to spend it on the projects. And still within that time period, be able to pay it off. The other half is there is such things as revenue sharing. It's only happened in one district in all the states. So if we actually start generating more than 12% a year, we actually have to start giving money back. So
To the taxing districts.
if Timberyard actually like went full bore, we would probably exceed that, but the chances of doing that is pretty slim and rare. And so I
usually 12% annually, you mean, if the jump is?
12% annually.
Huh.
We're.
It's an interesting
we're
little
doing-
thing in
what do
there.
we
I
do
didn't know
last year?
that
What
was in there.
3?
Yeah, our average
We
a-
modeled
annual
4.5, 5.
is like, yeah, I'd have to pull, let me look at the
Yeah.
performance
It,
metrics.
it would be a pretty big injection, and not saying that's not gonna happen, but
Yeah, I
I'm
would
less
argue
worried.
it will absolutely happen, and it's something we should prepare for, and we need to understand the complexities of these things.
So-
You, care of the county.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first 2 years, our average annual growth was 5.25%. This past year, it actually dropped down to 2.7, which brought our average annual growth since the beginning of the plan to 4.58%.
So.
It's cumulative, or is it annual? It's annual.
It's annual. So when you clear 12 or 12.5% on an annual, then anything above that, there's a certain you have to, I think you can only keep up to 50% of anything above that, and you have to give it the rest back to the taxing districts. It'd be
Yeah,
a great problem. to
champagne
have, let's just put it
problems.
that problem. But yeah, I think for right now, I think Timberyard will be the first big trigger, but you know, as Ali mentioned, we're looking at probably 8 to 10 years. Or I'm gonna worry about that problem. The future man problem. Yeah, that's-
Problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of other areas where CAB's role might come into effect is if the CFA areas are, slightly monitor the boundary of the core area, but they're slightly larger or something, you may want to consider evaluating whether to modify the boundary of the core area to match those CFA units. Those are all kind of conversations that would be within the purview of borough and CAB.
But yeah, just
Modifying it
kinda-
under 1% and just kind of.
Well, you can only do a cumulative 1%. So there's been a
Okay.
lot of pushback because of the Portland sort of areas pressing, and so they should come out. So we've run this problem with Jupiter's, we're having these discussions with people wanting to expand that. So we're talking 7 acres or 7.5 acres we could expand. You can always reduce without any issue. I think if we're doing that well, I think the questions you have to answer is to the other tax districts, why are we not giving that money back?
Mhm.
So that's again, our investors are the taxing districts. You can say the public, but that's who we look directly at. So they've made it pretty much strict. Like once you adopt the plan, then the hope is you stick to that plan and you don't deviate from it without a large public process.
Makes sense, the sharing to get buy-in too.
We might get Nick Lelak to show up here.
I told them they're always welcome. Yeah.
All right, folks, any other comments, updates, items to share? All right. well,
Earliest ending
I
CAB meeting.
know, all right,
Yeah.
go ahead and adjourn this CAB meeting. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Question, have you had any views that you
Trees are huge and